friends, welcome back to Food Prep Guide. Over the years, I have tested out some really strange gardening methods. Some of them have been total flops, but others have completely transformed the way I grow food. And those are the methods that I want to share with you today. I'm going to share 7 gardening practices that many experts would call crazy, but my garden produces more food with less work than it did when I wasn't using these methods. Probably the third method would be the most controversial in the gardening community. So controversial that I almost didn't include it in this video because I can already picture the comments that we'll receive. But so be it, it solved my seedling problem overnight. And wait until you see how I grow sweet potatoes. The internet and garden forums told me this method wouldn't work, but I tried it anyway, and it's the only way I grow sweet potatoes from now on. Okay, I don't know if you can hear it in my voice, but I'm getting excited. I kind of geek out over gardening talk, so let's just get started. If you are new to gardening or would like to teach your children or grandchildren this valuable skill, we have a Gardening for Beginners unit study coming soon. In the description box of the video you're watching, you will find a link where you can enter the giveaway for a chance to win a free copy. The winner will be notified by email, and everyone who enters will be notified when the unit study is available. If you're watching this video at a later date, it's possible that Gardening for Beginners is already available. If that's the case, you will be able to access it at the same link that's in the description box. If you're new here, we invite you to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming tutorials on gardening, canning, cooking, and more. Let's start with method number 1, and that is letting my basil bolt on purpose. Yes, I intentionally let my basil plants bolt. Now, if you're new to gardening, bolting is the term when a plant shifts from leaf production to flower and seed production. Conventional wisdom says you should pinch off your basil flowers as soon as they appear because once a basil plant bolts, the leaves become bitter and less flavorful overall. And that is true. The leaves do change flavor once the plant starts flowering. But here's where the weird practice comes in. I grow 2 different patches of basil. One patch I harvest regularly for our pesto, spaghetti sauce, and other preservation projects. But the other patch, I just let it go wild. I do this for 2 reasons. First is timing. Basil starts to bolt right around midsummer, which happens to be when many of my spring pollinator flowers are starting to die out. This creates what I call a pollinator gap in the garden. By letting some basil bolt, I'm providing a critical food source for bees and other pollinators exactly when they need it. You should see the bees when the basil is in full bloom. In fact, I think we have a video on the channel that shows how honeybees, in particular, bumblebees too, but honeybees especially, they just love bolted basil. The small purple-white flowers don't seem like much to us, but they seem to be the pollinator's favorite. The second reason is even more practical, and that's to increase production in my pepper plants. Here in Gardening Zone 7B, peppers really start kicking into high gear in late summer. Now, pepper plants are self-pollinating, but they will produce way more peppers with help from insect pollinators. Before I started letting some basil bolt, my pepper harvests were okay, but not great. After implementing this practice, I have seen at least a 30% increase in my pepper yields. The bolted basil acts like a pollinator magnet, drawing bees right next to my pepper plants. The bees visit the basil, then hop over to the pepper flowers, and boom, higher pollination rates and awesome increase in peppers. Pretty cool. Okay, method number 2 is growing sweet potatoes in wood chips. Now, this definitely goes against conventional gardening advice. I grow sweet potatoes in nothing but wood chips. I'm not talking about a regular like soil raised bed that is simply mulched with wood chips. I mean literally a pile of wood chips. When I first mentioned this in the gardening forum, people were quick to tell me that it wouldn't work. I heard things like sweet potatoes need rich, loamy soil, and other people would say wood chips will tie up all the nitrogen, which means they will steal nitrogen from your plants. And some people insisted that the only thing I would harvest was leaves. But here's what I knew that made me want to test out this theory anyway. Sweet potatoes are in the morning glory family and actually thrive in poor soil. Despite sharing the name, they are not actually related to regular potatoes. And while regular potatoes need rich soil with a good bit of nitrogen, sweet potatoes do not. In fact, when sweet potatoes are grown in soil that is too rich and too heavy in nitrogen, you will get beautiful vines but disappointing root development. The plants will focus all of their energy on growing lush green tops instead of tubers. I discovered this wood chip method kind of by accident about 2 years ago. I had a pile of wood chips sitting in a corner of my garden that I hadn't yet spread as mulch. I was using them as in my pathways at the time. So on a whim, I stuck a few sweet potato slips into the pile just to see what would happen. I figured they would probably die, but it was worth experimenting with because I had a few extra slips left over that I didn't really have room to put anywhere else. To my surprise, not only did they survive, but they thrived. The vines spread vigorously, and when harvest time came, I dug into that wood chip pile and found beautiful sweet potatoes. And they were incredibly easy to harvest. I didn't even need a pitchfork. No digging required, just moving away the loose wood chips. The wood chips create a perfect environment for sweet potato development, despite how it may seem on the surface. They hold just enough moisture without becoming waterlogged. They warm up really nicely in the sun, and if you know anything about sweet potatoes, you know that they love heat. They also provide a loose, airy medium that sweet potatoes really love to expand in. I've refined the method since that one kind of accidental test years ago. I now create a wood chip pile that's at least about 3 feet deep. And I do add a handful of soil, like literally just one handful, to plant the slips directly in just to help them get established. And then I water regularly until they start vining, and then I just let them do their thing. So if you have access to wood chips and want to grow sweet potatoes, you might want to give this weird method a try, and you might be surprised by the results. Now, I will note that wood chips are not appropriate for pretty much any other food, vegetable-based food. Fruit trees are great in wood chips, fruit bushes, berries, that kind of thing, and sweet potatoes, but pretty much any of your other vegetable crops you don't want to plant in straight wood chips. Okay, now let's move on to method number 3, which is the controversial one that I almost didn't include in this video, and that is I actively bait and relocate roly-polies. They're also called pill bugs. I relocate them away from wherever I have seedlings planted, and here's the controversial part, because they will eat baby seedlings down to the nubs. Now, I do not kill them. I specifically said relocate, and that's what I do. I move them from areas where my vulnerable young seedlings are, and I move them over to either a compost pile or just somewhere else entirely on our property where they can do what they do best, which is break down organic matter. This is controversial because there is a prevailing belief in many gardening circles that roly-polies, also known as pill bugs, do not eat living plants, but that they only consume dead and decaying matter. And while it's true that dead plant material is their preferred food source, it is not their only food source. I have witnessed firsthand that they absolutely will munch on tender young seedlings. I first noticed this a few years ago when I was having trouble with my bean seedlings. It was a batch of green beans in particular. Every morning, I would go out and find yet another seedling damaged or even just completely gone. So I started conducting some garden stakeouts, y'all. I mean, I would go out there late at night, sit and watch. I'd get up early in the morning, right at dawn, sit and watch until I found the culprit. And I was completely surprised to find that it was clusters of roly-polies that would gather around my seedlings at night and feed on the stems and leaves. Now here is where I am very careful. I still value roly-polies in my garden's ecosystem. Not only do they break down organic matter, but they help clean up heavy metals in the soil, which is pretty amazing and definitely not something that I want to intervene with. So instead of reaching for pesticides, I bait them by placing a cut piece of potato or a few apple slices near vulnerable seedlings in the evening. By morning time, the bait is usually covered with roly-polies, and I will then simply transport them to other areas on my property where they can munch and do their cleanup crew thing without damaging sensitive young plants. Once my seedlings reach about 8 to 10 inches tall and develop tougher stems, they're generally no longer vulnerable to roly-poly damage. They might still nibble on them a little bit, but the plant can withstand it and it's not that much of an issue. But I've also found that as the plant gets bigger, roly polies don't even mess with them anymore. They go back to their dead and decaying plant material. So this relocation effort, this bait and relocate, is only needed for a short period of time. I would say typically about 3 weeks after planting or transplanting. Okay, now let's move on to something a bit less controversial, but just as effective, and that is method number 4, growing zucchini vertically. It has completely changed how I grow zucchini, saving garden space and improving my harvest at the same time. If you've grown traditional summer squash and zucchini varieties, you know that they typically grow as sprawling bush plants that take up a lot of space. A single plant can easily spread 3 to 4 feet in every direction, and that's a big footprint for just one vegetable. Several years ago, I was struggling with limited gardening space, and I was really tired of the battle against squash vine borers. So I started researching, and I came across an Italian zucchini variety called Zucchino rampicante. It's also known as trumpet squash. Unlike standard zucchini varieties, this one grows as a vigorous vine that can be trained up a trellis. Switching to this variety and growing it vertically has really been a game changer in my garden. Where I used to fit 3 or 4 bush zucchini plants, I can now grow 6 to 8 on a trellis, but the footprint is only half the size of the bush varieties. Plus, I can use the space underneath the trellis for shade-loving crops like spinach or lettuce or anything in the greens family, really, kale, things like that. Beyond the space-saving benefits, there are many other advantages to growing zucchini vertically. First, vertical growing dramatically improves air circulation around the plants, which reduces the risk of powdery mildew and other fungal issues that zucchini is prone to. Before I switched to vertical growing, I was constantly battling powdery mildew by midsummer, but now it's rarely an issue. Second, the fruits are much more visible when the plants grow vertically, so that means no more giant surprise zucchinis hiding under the leaves. That has happened way too many times. The third benefit is pest management. When you grow zucchini off the ground, it just naturally reduces the problems that you have with slugs and other ground-dwelling pests. It also makes it easier to spot and manage squash bugs before they become a serious issue. For the trellis, I use a simple hoop structure made from cattle panels. The openings, the little squares built into cattle panels, are perfect for the tendrils to grab onto, and the structure is sturdy enough to support the weight of the vines and fruit. One tip is while the vines will climb on their own, they do need a little guidance, especially when young. I will use either zip ties or soft twine to loosely tie the main stem to the trellis until the plant gets established and starts grabbing it with its tendrils. What's really fun about this variety is that if you let it grow really large and fully mature, it functions more as a winter squash both in flavor and storability. It's kind of like having 2 crops in one. You can harvest it young and it'll be more like a true zucchini, or you can let it mature and it'll be almost like a butternut squash. It's really cool. Okay, method number 5 is that I clone my tomato plants. It might sound a little sci-fi, but it's actually a simple, time-tested technique that helps me maximize harvest on a budget. First, let me explain what I mean by cloning. I'm talking about taking cuttings from established tomato plants and rooting them to create identical copies. This technique has several advantages over starting all of your tomatoes from seed or buying the pricey transplants at the store. But first, I want to explain how I do it because it's really, really easy. I look for healthy suckers on my established tomato plants. Those are the shoots that grow in the so-called elbow between the main stem and a branch. If you picture a capital letter V and you have a stem coming straight up through the center of that V, that's going to be your sucker. You'll use clean scissors or pruners and cut off a 4 to 6 inch sucker. Then you'll want to remove the lower leaves, leaving just the 2 top sets. The cutting will then go into a glass of water placed in indirect sunlight, and within 1 to 2 weeks, roots will begin to form all along the stem. Typically, I wait until roots are at least 1 inch long, if not 2 inches long, and then I go ahead and plant it, keep it well watered for a week or so, And there you go. You have a clone of your original tomato plant and you didn't have to pay for it. It's, it takes some time, but it really isn't very time consuming at all. And it's certainly not difficult. But the most important reason why I do this is to be able to replicate my best performing plants. If you've been gardening for long, you know we all have that one tomato plant that just seems to outshine all the others. The one that produces earlier, has better disease resistance, or just makes exceptionally delicious fruit. By taking cuttings, I can create genetic copies of that plant, essentially preserving its favorable characteristics. Another huge benefit is extending the growing season. Now, this is going to be zone dependent and growing season dependent. Here in zone 7B, we don't have our first fall frost until the end of October. If you have a long growing season like that, you can absolutely get a fall crop of tomatoes. And so that's what I do. About halfway through summer, I will take cuttings from my healthiest plants, and these cuttings quickly develop into new plants that start producing later in the season and continue into fall, long after my original early summer plants have begun to decline or die out. Or more often here in my area, succumb to disease. Fungal disease is a huge thing in the hot and humid South. But this gives me a second wave of production without having to start new plants from seed. The other benefit from that is that cloned plants produce a lot faster than seed-started plants. Since they're already mature, they don't have to go through all that vegetative growth before setting fruit. A cutting taken from a mature plant can start flowering in as little as 2 weeks after it establishes roots. Now, there are a couple of caveats to this method. First is that it really works best on indeterminate tomato varieties, not determinate bush types. If you prune a determinate bush type, you are going to significantly decrease your yields from that plant. But indeterminate vining varieties, meaning they just keep on growing, it's going to continue putting out shoots and suckers and branches, and it's not going to be harmed by you taking a few suckers and making clones. But the second thing you want to consider is that since clones are genetically identical to their parent plants, they also are going to be prone to the same susceptibilities. If you are cloning to avoid disease problems, you want to make sure that you take cuttings only from the healthiest plants that don't have a single sign of disease on them. Okay, let's move on to method number 6, and that is my simple but effective technique for defeating a really frustrating garden pest. I will wrap aluminum foil around my squash stems. This is in order to prevent squash vine borer damage. If you've ever grown squash or zucchini, you might be familiar with this pest. The adult squash vine borer is a moth that lays eggs at the base of squash plants. When the eggs hatch, the larvae bore into the stems and feed from the inside, eventually killing the entire plant, often right when it's about to start producing. It's heart-wrenching to see a healthy, productive squash plant suddenly wilt and die overnight. Once the vine borers are inside the stem, they are extremely difficult to remove without damaging the plant, and it's almost impossible to save a plant after it's already has a vine borer inside of it. So the key is prevention. After losing multiple plants to these pests year after year, I really started digging into prevention methods, and that's when I found this aluminum foil collar, so to speak. It sounded a little too simple to be effective, but I tried it anyway because that's just what I do in the garden. I like to test and try things. In fact, that's how a lot of these methods are coming to you in this video, is just testing and trying. And to my surprise, the aluminum foil worked beautifully. Here's how to do it. When squash plants develop their first true set of leaves and the stem is about the thickness of a pencil, you'll wrap the lower stem about 2 to 3 inches worth with just regular aluminum foil. I start just below the soil level and then work my way up the stem, making sure the foil is snug but not tight enough to constrict the stem. I do want to make sure that the soil kind of comes up over the aluminum foil a little bit, or maybe another way to say that is that the aluminum foil is kind of buried into the soil a little bit. Basically, you don't want any piece of that stem showing between the soil and the aluminum foil. The adult borers won't lay eggs on the foil. It's really rough. It's really, harsh on them, on their bodies, so they won't lay eggs there. But even if they lay eggs like nearby on top of the soil, the hatching larvae typically can't penetrate the foil barrier for the same reasons that the moths don't want to lay eggs. It's just, it doesn't feel good to them. They don't want to crawl on that pokey material. It's a physical barrier, not a chemical one, so there's no concern about toxicity or harming beneficial insects like your pollinators. I should note that while this technique has been extremely effective in my garden, it is not 100% foolproof. Some particularly determined borers might find a way around the barrier, or they might just attack higher up on the plant. For this reason, I paired this aluminum collar method with growing the zucchini rampicante variety that I previously mentioned, which just doesn't seem to be as bothered by vine borers in the first place. Okay, my seventh and final weird gardening practice has revolutionized the way that I start seeds. I use plastic milk jugs to start my seeds in a method called winter sowing. If you're friends of the channel, this is no surprise to you, but if you're new here, allow me to share a little more about the milk jug method. Traditional seed starting usually involves indoor seed trays, grow lights, and the delicate process of hardening off seedlings before transplanting. It can be time consuming. It does require that you have some space available in your house, and it can often result in leggy seedlings where they are tall and thin, stretching for the light. The winter sowing method eliminates most of these challenges. I collect clean, empty plastic milk jugs, the gallon size works best, and then using an X-Acto knife, I cut around the middle of the jug just below the handle, leaving a small hinge intact so the top portion can still flip open. I then punch drainage holes in the bottom, usually with a drill, and fill the lower portion of the jug with 4 to 5 inches or so of moistened potting soil. Now this part is important. You don't want to use traditional seed starting mix. This is because we don't up pot or switch containers throughout the plant's growth stages like you typically would with other seed starting methods. These seedlings will spend their entire early growth stage inside these milk jugs, so they need enough nutrients to sustain that growth, and seed starting mix just doesn't provide that. So anyway, you plant the seeds like you normally would. I usually put 6 to 8 seeds per jug for bigger seeds like squash, tomato. Tomatoes aren't really that big, but they're bigger seeds, beans, squash, that kind of thing. And then I simply broadcast really tiny seeds like most herbs and lettuces and greens. Next, close the jug and secure it with duct tape. Leave the cap off to allow for air circulation and for your raining and watering to go in. Then you just place these jugs outside in the winter or early spring, even if there's still frost or snow on the ground. The milk jug acts as a mini greenhouse. During the day, they warm up in the sun, creating a microclimate for germination. At night, they provide just enough insulation to protect the delicate seeds. The seeds themselves won't germinate until conditions are right. When they do sprout, they grow stocky and strong, naturally adjusted to outdoor conditions. The first year that I tried this method, I was skeptical, just like probably anyone else would be. Putting seeds outside in winter seems counterintuitive, but the results spoke for themselves, and my winter seedlings outperformed my indoor started ones in almost every case. There are a few tips that can make this method even more successful, and that is to start your winter sowing about 8 weeks before your last expected frost date. Some seeds can go out even earlier, but I do tend to stick to that 8-week time frame. Check moisture levels occasionally. Jugs usually maintain moisture well, but during particularly dry spells, you might need to go water them with like a sprinkle water hose, that kind of thing. As temperatures warm up in the spring, if you have days, like we have days every now and then where we might have a frost at night, but it could potentially get up into the 60s, 65 degrees during the day. If you live in a climate like that, you might want to open up the jugs on particularly hot days if you have seedlings that are already established inside those jugs, just to prevent them from overheating. But when seedlings reach a good size and you are past your final frost date, you can cut the tops off completely, allow the seedlings to fully acclimate for a day or two with just the milk jug cut off. Just let them sit there for a day or two, and then you're ready to transplant. This method does require some patience. Germination is often slower than with indoor seed starting because it follows nature's timeline, meaning they don't sprout immediately. They will only sprout when the soil temperature is right. But in my experience, the resulting plants are healthier and more robust. Okay, there you have it. This has been my 7 kind of weird gardening practices that might raise eyebrows, but they deliver real results. What all these methods have in common is that they work with nature rather than against it, and they solve specific problems that I have personally encountered in my garden journey. Gardening is a lot about experimentation. What works in my growing zone and my specific gardening conditions might need tweaking to work in yours, but I encourage you to approach gardening with curiosity and an open mind. Just because someone says that can't be done doesn't mean it can't be done in your microclimate. And sometimes those weird methods end up being the most effective ones. I'd love to hear about any unusual gardening practice that you might have that have worked well for you, and drop them in the comments below. I am always looking for new things to try. That's all for today.